Hello, everybody. Benga Olatunji here. You see, this world has lasted for so long because it was built on principle, and such principles as aerodynamics, thermodynamics, the law of physics, the law of chemistry, and the like. Elements of chemistry and the like. They never change. They are basic. Likewise, also building a strong career in auditing and accountancy requires principles going back to the basic. And that is why we need to understand and study principle of auditing. So we will be overviewing the principle of audits going back to the basic, and we are going to be looking at this in this video, examining the expectation of the institute concerning us as regards the principles of auditing, learning the breakdown of the principles, the aim and objectives of the principles. We are going to talk about the topics and overview them. We are going to learn about the chapters and overview them, and we are going to introduce ourselves to the nature, the purpose, and the scope of auditing. So let us go into the breakdown of auditing as a course. Going into it, we have it broken down into 5 parts. Introduction to auditing, it carries 25%. And under introduction to auditing, we'll be looking at and talking about the auditing principles and theories. We'll be talking about the rights, the duties, and the responsibility of auditors. The auditing principle and theory is 5 marks, or 5% rather. Right, duty, and responsibility of auditors, 5% also. Regulatory framework is 5% still under the introduction to auditing. Professional ethics is another 5%. And last but not the least, under the introduction to auditing is auditor's liability. So all these 5 elements or subtopics made up introduction to auditing, which has 25% weight in our scoring. Then the B part is the assurance process. This carries 20%. And under it, we have audit planning, we have evidence, we have test and verification procedures. This is 5%. Also, we have audit evidence and verification. This is 10%. And we have audit test and sampling technique, 5%. So it will sum it up. It's going to give us the 20% under assurance process. Then we'll move on to the next topic, which is also important: internal control. And we are going to learn a lot about internal control, internal control environment, internal control activity, and the like, a whole lot under internal control. It is 20%. Then we will move on to assurance in specialized environments. Assurance in specialized environment, because oftentimes there are a lot of other specialized industries that we need to look at, like public sector area or environment. We need to look at it. Is 10% auditing or public sector assurance, that is the 10%. Then we'll look at IT-based assurance, which is 5%. So that gives us another 15%. Then last but not the least, that the breakdown of principles of auditing is audit completion. How do we finalize audits? We'll be looking at the report writing and reports on financial statements. That is 10%. How to write audit reports. That is 10%. Then audit completion. What and what do we need to look at before we give or express our opinion? The reviews and the like. We are going to be learning under this. So that is the breakdown of the principle of auditing being broken down into 5. Then let us move on to the next item on our agenda, and as a matter of importance, we will love that you subscribe. This is very important to us. When you subscribe, you are encouraging us to reach out to more and also to keep on doing this good work. So I'd love to subscribe and click notification. Please click all. What are the aims and objectives? Why are we studying this? Before we move on to the overview of our topic, why are we studying auditing? Primarily, we need to understand audit process from planning to reporting. From planning to reporting. Also, we need to understand the risks that are associated with the audit engagements. The nature and essence of audit must be understood. Computerized operations of accounting and audit environments. We need to understand it, and needs of various organizations and specialized audit environment and accounting environment. We need to learn the ethics of the profession. Is one of the key things that we need to learn in this course, and it's very important for anybody that wants to last, having labored to understand and build this career. We must learn the regulatory framework and ethical issue that surrounds our industry and profession. Our ability to communicate effectively is very important. Communication. So it's part of what we are going to learn in form of how to write reports and the like. Also, for us to appreciate the function and purpose of internal reporting, external reporting, financial reporting to external stakeholders, principle of internal control, we need to understand, as simple as it may, the preliminary reports that relates to audit assignments. All these and many more, we need to understand them before we move on to the business world generally. What are the topics that we need to familiarize ourselves with under the principles of auditing? The nature, the purpose, the scope of auditing is important to us. The regulatory framework is important to us. The professional ethics is important to us. We are going to be learning as a topic, which is actually 12 topics: auditor's liability, audit planning and documentation. We are going to be learning audit tests and sampling procedures. We are going to be learning internal control systems. We are going to be learning audit planning and documentation. We are going to be learning IT-based assurance, public sector assurance. We are going to be learning how to report on the financial statement that we've audited, and also how to write that report and finalize the audit in form of review and other necessary steps that we must take to have a closure to an audit engagement. Having said this, we move on to Before we move on to the nature and purpose and scope of auditing, which is our chapter 1, we will like us to now go into details of the topics, the nature, the purpose, and the scope of auditing. What and what are we expected to know from there? So now we take it topic by topic and the expectation from us now. So the first is the nature, the purpose, and the scope of audit. We need to understand the background of audit. And audit actually has its history, the history that transcends majority of the professions in this world. Audit is as old actually as humanity. So we are going to understudy the history of audit. We are going to learn also the audits today in our world in this jet age and how technology is affecting and changing audit environments. We are going to learn the definition of auditing, and please know that in audit majority of people fail, especially those that are audit students fail because of the terminologies in audit that are not well understood by the time they are writing the exam. So we need knowledge of keywords in audit to pass it. So the definition of auditing will be looked at. We will look at why the need for an audit. Why do we need to audit, especially knowing that accountants had worked on those financials? Why do we need to audit them? Then the objective and the general principle governing the audit of financial statements. Don't forget principles uphold this world. So likewise applicable to audit environments. The objective of an audit, without knowing the objective of every audit engagement and assignment, most likely we may not be able to express our opinion correctly, because we must ensure we tie the objective of an audit to the conclusion of an audit, rather to the objective of that particular audit. Then we are going to learn the general principles of auditing, the general principles of auditing, the principle of objectivity, of independence, and the like. We are going to understand in this chapter 1. We are going to learn about the reasonable assurance. These are levels of assurance: reasonable level of assurance, limited level of assurance, and many more. And while we have what we have, are going to be learning under reasonable assurance. Then we go to understand audit risk and materiality. Audit risk basically is divided into three. We have the inherent risk, the control risk, the detection risk, and the effects of all these on effect of materiality on all these risks, and how to go about an effective audit. Then we need to understand the responsibility for the financial statement. Who has the responsibility in preparation of the financial statement? We need to know, is it us as auditor, or is it us as accountant? Where should we draw the line? Public sector perspective about the audit, the auditor, and the audit engagement. We need to understand and where to draw the line and what to do when public sector perspective is wrong about our work or our delivery. Advantages of audit, disadvantages of audit, limitations of audit, the expectation gap. How should we bridge expectation gap? We are going to understand it too. The structure of an audit firm. We need to know, from the managing partner even to the last trainee and the like. the staff partner, and the like. How do we structure an audit firm? We need to understand it. Then we will understand types of audits. Types of audits, the internal audit, the final audit, and the like. Private audits and statutory audits. These are parts of the types of audit that we need to understand. The external and the internal audits we need to understand. How to complete audits, the interim audit, and the continuous audit or rolling audit. We need to understand the system audit and balance sheet audit, which we now call statement of comprehensive financial position, rather statement of financial position. Also, we need to understand the meaning of assurance. We've been talking about audit. The meaning of assurance, we need to understand it, and the difference or differences between assurance and pure audit. We need to understand it. Then we'll move on to understanding the agency theory and auditing. The agency theory and auditing. Then we know or learn about audit committees. We learn about the audit committees. Then and after that, we can move on to the second chapter, which is expecting us to know and understand the following. Under the regulatory framework of auditing, we need to know the keeping, how to keep proper book of accounts. Who is responsible for it? Is it us or anyone else? We need to understand this. Who is responsible for the keeping of books of accounts? We need to understand it. Then we need to understand mandatory requirements to have accounts audited. Every organization, be it private, be it public, be it an enterprise, actually should audit. So we are going to learn the mandatory requirements for audit. Then we'll move on to appointment and remuneration of auditors. Who is responsible to appoint auditor? Is it the shareholders? Is it the directors? Is it the management staff and the like? We need to be certain as to that. Who qualifies to be an auditor? Is every accountant an auditor? We need to answer that yes or no and learn why and how, the process of becoming an auditor, and why an auditor is an auditor, and why an accountant is an accountant. Who qualifies to be an auditor? Who appoints auditor? We need to know whether it's shareholder, whether it's the directors or the like, or government. Who fixes the auditor's remuneration? We need to understand it. We need to understand how to remove or resign as auditor. Removal and resignation of an auditor, we need to understand it so that we will not be removed wrongly or forced to resign or resign in a manner that is not expected of auditing framework or the law of the land. We need to understand other types of departure from office of the auditor, our rights and responsibility as auditors. We need to know the duties of auditors. We need to know the duties and the responsibilities of the directors and the management. We need to understand the rights of an auditor. We need to understand the right to have access, the right to be given information, and so many other rights and privileges that we have as auditor. We need to know. Also, we are going to be tested about the requirement for competence and integrity. A requirement for our competence and our integrity. The principle of our due care, the principle of skill, the principle of competence. Where do they come in, and where are the exceptions? Where can we draw exceptions from? we need to understand the principle of integrity, the duty of confidence and confidentiality to our clients, and the exception to the rule of confidentiality. We need to understand it as we are building the basics for our principle of auditing. Also, the requirement for objectivity and independence. The integrity, the objectivity, the independence when we are reviewing an audit carried out. We need to understand procedures of the audit appointments of an auditor. How should we be appointed? How should we onboard our client to? Pre-accepting conditions that we must meet. Also, the ethical consideration that we must have, the legal consideration that we must understand before we onboard our clients, practical considerations that we must not forget. Also, seeking references about our clients at the planning stage to know them and understand them and familiarize. We call it familiarization. Then communicating with the present auditor. That is, if we are auditing an organization that has been in existence before and had maybe series or at least one audit being conducted before, we need to reach out. And how should we reach out to the former auditor before our appointment? Then post acceptance procedure. After we've been appointed and we've accepted to be their auditor, what should we do? Those are the things that we'll be learning there. Then we need to understand the purpose of our letter of engagement. Then we need to understand letter of engagement by itself. Then for what purpose or purposes are we having letter of engagement? What should be in the letter of engagement? The content of letter of engagement. What should we put there? For example, we need to educate our clients so that we can bridge the expectation gap. Is part of what we need to put in the letter of engagement, and so many other things that we'll be learning. We need to understand issuing and receiving engagement letter. What are the processes? What are the things we should look out for? Public sector perspective also about our work. Examples of letter of engagement, that is like a format of letter of engagement, and this is a common area of examination. We need to know and understand the template very well. Auditor's responsibility to consider fraud and error. We need to understand, are we actually engaged to look out for error or to look out for fraud, or what is actually auditor's responsibility? Where can we draw the line? What's the scope of our audit? Responsibility of auditor, we are going to understudy it. The procedures when there is an indication that fraud or errors may exist or had occurred. What should we do? Where should we set our boundary as auditor, and when should management come in? We need to understand. Reporting fraud and error to the management, reporting fraud and error to the members of the company. Now we are talking about the board. Reporting fraud and error to the third party, that is outside the jurisdiction of our client's domain. We need to understand where NOCLA actually come in, that is non-compliance, that is exception to our confidentiality responsibility. We need to ensure the reporting of our fraud and error to third party is in compliance with the auditing standard and framework. Withdrawal from the engagement. How can we leave the job of our clients? How should we leave? These are the procedures that we are going to be learning here. Then auditor's responsibility to consider non-compliance with law and regulation. It's actually law and regulation. We call it NOCLA. Responsibility of the directors, responsibility of the auditor in public sector. Now I need to stress this out as we are talking about audit in public sector, because the objective of private sector audit and public sector audit are actually different. So when we are engaged for audit practice of public sector, that is public sector audit, governmental audit, there are different objectives that we must look out for from the objective of the private organization. So we need to learn what they are so that we can audit correctly. So that leads us equally to the auditor's responsibility in audit of public sector, auditor in public sector, the audit consideration of compliance with law and regulation, the procedure when we have a nuclear issue during our audit, especially because the procedure and the governance changes actually between the private and the public sector. So we need to learn how to report NOCLA, that is non-compliance to law and regulation. We need also to report non-compliance with law and regulation to the management. Don't forget that the management structure is different to the shareholder or stakeholders. Now to the third party, we need to understand how to withdraw from the audit engagement that is of public character. The impact of law and accounting standard like IAS 1 that lets us know that there must be comparative figures and like what are the impacts on audits in form of time, in form of resources, in form of knowledge base of auditor and many more. The scope of audit function as regards the company law in our country. We need to have it as and grasp it very well. Then professional ethics, and under professional ethics there are things equally that we need to learn. We need to understand what ethics are, what morality are. We need to understand the fundamental principles as set and laid out by Institute of Chartered Accountants, especially in Nigeria. Also, the code of ethics we need to understand. The professional conduct for the members we need to understand of ICANN and Chartered Accountant worldwide. We need to understand our professional conduct and how to apply our professional ethics in anything that we do. Also, auditors' responsibility with regards to confidentiality. Then we move on to chapter 4, in which we need to understand the auditor's liability, the civil liability, the criminal liability, the liability that comes as a result of our negligence, the statutory liability, that is the liability that arises and recognized by law. We have the civil, we have the criminal, and we move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 5, talking about the audit planning is important for audit not to fail. Audit planning procedures. What steps and guide should we follow when we are planning so that we will not overlook important areas in our audit execution? Then we need to understand planning and audit of financial statement. Don't forget, I used to tell my students that actually every area of life could actually be audited. Now we are talking about financial statements, but you can actually audit other areas of life. So planning and audits, we need to understand the preliminary engagement activity when planning an audit. Like, we must have our audit planning memorandum, and how should we go about building one? So we need to understand the overall audit strategy that we want to use. There are strategies in audits. What are they? Those are the things we will be learning. The audit planning. Then we are going to understand changes to planning and planning decision during the course of an audit. That is, now we are already on the field. There may arise need or even needs on the field that may make us to jettison our planned approach and strategy and undertake another. So what could cause us to do that? We need to learn it and how to respond to changes on the field. Then direction, supervision, and review of audit work. Who are responsible? Should we build audit team? Then the procedure of audit planning. What should go first? What should follow? Now we are talking about an APM, like I mentioned before. Knowledge of the client's business under familiarity. We need to understand that. Then sources of knowledge, that when we want to know our clients, where can we go to understand them? Who do we need to meet to understand them? Then we need to talk about how to use the knowledge of our clients. Where should we draw the line of what we know about our clients? When should we disclose? When do we need to keep quiet and not disclose any? What are the rules? What are the frameworks? What are the legislations that we must adhere to? Matters to consider in relation to knowledge of our client's business, and this is important to us. Audit risk assessments. Before we embark on any audit, we need to assess the risk. How should we approach risk assessment? Who is responsible for risk assessment? How should we plan about materiality on our engagement? We need to understand the various types of risk: inherent risk, control risk, detection risk, the formula that we need to use to calculate it and monitor it. Then we'll talk about planning for materiality and audit documentation, the audit file and the working paper, the permanent file, the current year file, and the like, and the working paper, characteristics of a good working paper, characteristics of a good audit file, and the like. Then we need to have understanding of who owns audit working paper, who should have it in custody, for how long do we need to have it in custody. These and many more are the things that we'll be answering under audit file and working paper. Then we move on to gathering of audit evidence. Audit evidence and verification procedures. So we need to understand the nature and the scope of audit evidence. When should we stop gathering audit evidence? When is it enough? When is it sufficient? When is it appropriate? Then we need to understand the concept of audit evidence. Don't forget, when we are talking about concept, we are talking about principle. And audit as evidence as its backbone. We must gather enough appropriate audit evidence. So we need to learn this concept very well. Then types of audit evidence. We need to understand what are the types of audit evidence. And don't forget, audit evidence can be in hard copy and soft copy, among so many other things we are going to learn. We need to understand, when we are talking about sufficiency of audit evidence, appropriateness of audit evidence, these are critical knowledge to us. Then we need to understand how to obtain audit evidence. Where should we get our evidence? The sources of audit evidence. Reliability tests or tests. Reliability of third-party evidence. The meaning of external confirmation, like bank confirmation and the like. We need to understand it. Then the signing of the external confirmation requests. That is when we are sending external confirmation letters to maybe debtors, creditors, bankers, and some other interested third party. How should we decide what should be the content of a good external confirmation request, and the types of external confirmation request that we have? Then the use of positive and negative confirmation. These are types of external confirmation requests that we may have, negative or positive. Then what is negative? What makes it positive? These are the things that we are going to understand before we can write principle of auditing as an examination. Management requests. When management requests or requested for evidence from us, don't forget we need to understand who owns the audit working paper and the like. Then we'll talk about characteristics of respondents in form of third party and the like, or anybody we wish to confirm one thing or the other from to corroborate our audit evidence. The external confirmation processes that we need to follow, we need to understand it. No response to our positive confirmation requests. When we have this situation, what does it imply, and how should auditor go about concluding on his audit findings? Reliability of response received too. So we can have a situation in which we receive responses. How should we deal with it? We can have a situation in which we do not even receive confirmation for our request at all. How should we deal with it? Causes and frequency of exceptions to our audit findings, audit evidence rather, and the like. We need to understand. Evaluating the results of our confirmation processes. What should we look at from the confirmation that we receive, and what processes must it follow? The external confirmation prior to the year end, we need to understand how to go about that. Specific examples of third-party confirmation, like I mentioned, the debtors, the creditors, the bankers, and so many others that we are going to learn. Debtors confirmation, bank confirmation, legal confirmation, pending legal matters like court case. How should we go about it? Summary of third-party confirmation, the reliability of audit evidence. How can we say an audit evidence is reliable? What are the proof that is reliable? The test that must be conducted, the time it must be time tested, and so many other things we are going to learn anyway. Using the work of an expert, who is an expert, and the like, the types of experts we need to understand. Determining the need to use the work of an expert. Not every time that we engage in an audit that we will need or require experts input. When? How should we know when we need an expert? Competence and the objectivity of an expert. How can we go about to determine is our competence and objectivity as experts? The scope of experts' work, how should we determine it? Evaluating the work of an expert, how should we evaluate experts' work, knowing fully well that it's not our field, but we need to incorporate their opinion into us as the auditor's report. So how should we evaluate so that we will not go wrong in finalizing and concluding and expressing our opinion as to the truthfulness and the fair presentation of the financial statements that we've worked on? Then the reference. How should we reference expert work in our audit reports? Should we even reference it at all? And if we should reference it, how should we and when, and what are the processes, the procedure, and how to go about it? Then we move on to another critical thing that we must do on every audit engagement, talking about management representation. Management representation simply means that we want the management of the organization, of our clients organization, to tell us in writing or corroborate what we've observed in the course of our audit. Then they need to write us. We call it management representation. What and what should be in management representation? What are we expecting them to include? What are the types of management representation that we have? Verification of assets and liability. How should we go about it? What are the easiest way of learning how to verify assets and liability? The trade debtors and the creditors, verification, work in process, verification, liability verification, verification of non-current assets, intangible assets, the physical examination of tangible assets and the like. Quality control that must be carried out before we conclude on our audit reports. Who and who, what quality control should be, what are the framework that we must adhere to, who and who have the responsibility for quality control assurance in an audit firm. Then the peer review, we need to understand it. Who are the peers that can review and the like, and how can we review generally? Then we move on to the seventh part of our topic, which is talking about the audit tests and the sampling procedure. Audit test and the sampling procedure. What is audit sample or audit sampling? Why do we sample in an audit environment? What is the definition of a sample or audit sample? What are the characteristics of a good audit sample? Selecting items for testing to gather audit evidence. So what are the types, the techniques for audit sampling? The judgmental sampling. What is judgmental sampling? How should we design audit sample? What is population? How should we go about isolating the selected sample from population? What are the representation that a sample must have? The value weighted selection, the sampling size, performing the audit procedure on the sample so that to ensure that it fully represents every element within the population. The nature and the causes of error if we wrongly sample. The evaluation of sample results to ensure that it depicts and represents the whole population. The summary of the step in audit sampling. We actually have steps in carrying out sampling in an audit environment. What and what are involved in these sampling steps? We are going to be learning the substantive audit procedures. What is substantive procedure? Then we need to understand the nature of the substantive procedure. We need to understand substantive testing procedure for key audit areas like the expense. We need to understand substantive testing that should be carried out for sales or revenue and so many other captions of our audits or the financial statements. Then the verification of balance sheet, which we now call statement of financial position. Then the specific verification objective that we need to ensure and carry out on the different caption or different segments of the statement of financial position. How should we verify capital, paid up capital? What and what evidence do we need for paid-up capital, the authorized share capital, the debtors breakdown, the creditors breakdown. How should we verify all those and many more are what we are going to be learning. Still under audit sampling and test, we need to understand the verification objective. Don't forget I said that we must tie together our conclusion with the objective of the audit when we started it. And by the time we know all this, it's laid a solid foundation for our professionalism. Then the verification procedure for different captions, the verification objective and program for some asset classes. We need to understand it. Different asset classes and different verification objective and different programs actually. What is program? Basically, programs are actually series of instruction to carry out our audit assignment or audit engagement. Moving on, we need to understand audit program for verification of stock, stock quantity, stock count, stock valuation, value of work in process, which we may call work in progress, value of stock generally. We need to understand how to attend stock taking in our client's office. We need to understand the type of stock taking that we have. We need to understand stock taking procedures and processes, what to do and what not to do, where we need to be involved and where we must not be involved in stock counts, how to use stock counts when we are finally having our final audit. All this we are going to learn here. Then analytical procedure for our tests and our audit evidence. Before we conclude, the nature and the purpose of analytical procedure, like the ratio analysis and the like. We need to learn the processes and the procedures for risk assessment procedure. We need to understand what we mean by substantive procedure or substantive testing. Then suitability of using substantive testing or substantive analysis procedure given the assertion. What are assertions then? When we are talking about assertions, we are talking about affirmation made whether by the management or by any responsible officer or that has contributed in the course of the audit assignments. Those are assertions. Then we must understand how suitable it is to contribute to our audit opinion. The reliability of the data gathered, that is scattered information all around that will pull together to become a meaningful information for audit processes. We need to understand what and when to use them. We need to understand how to identify reliable data to use and data that we could not use, that we could not rely on, and whether they are actually sufficient and they are good to be used based on our expectation or not. We need to understand the differences of recorded amounts from from the expected. We need to be able to analyze the overall review and the end of our audits. We need to be able to put everything we've gathered together to make a meaningful decision and to make a meaningful conclusion as to the truthfulness or fair presentation of the financial statements. We need to learn, and also we'll be learning how to investigate unusual items. Unusual items are items that are we may call it outliers, that is maybe in form of their sizes, in form of their frequency, they become unusual. We need to learn how to investigate them and come to a conclusion for our audit assignment. Then the public perspective and the public opinion, how to manage it, the practice of analytical processes, ratio analysis, and the like. We need to understand audit procedure for subsequent year. What do we mean by subsequent year audit actually? And subsequent year events. We need to understand what this means and how it affects our audit opinion. What to include and what not to include when we observe subsequent year events. Accounting treatments of different types of captions in financial statements. Auditing procedures, auditing processes. We need to learn them and know how to practicalize them. We need to understand subsequent events and how to discover them, especially after the year end of the financial statement. But before we issue out our audit opinion or audit report, we need to understand audit procedure for subsequent events that we discover after the financial year have been issued, but before they are laying before the members of the client's office. That is, before we sign and before the board of directors met on the financial statement, audited financial statement actually. Audit procedure for contingencies. Contingencies simply means those things that we cannot actually fathom as to whether they will occur or not. Those items that are under probabilities, those figures that are under probabilities, we may need to make assumption of them and put an audit adjustment out on them. Auditing procedure for subsequent year, I've discussed that. Audit procedure for contingency, yeah. Audit procedure for going concern basis of an organization. We need to be very sure that the organization of our clients will actually continue. If there are events that may not make them to continue in business, we should be able to identify it in the course of our audit to a reasonable expected end, not actually because we are not going to have understood everything in the future, but at least if there are reasons to doubt the longevity of the business of our clients, we should raise concern about it, and this is done under audit procedure for going concern basis. Then, is the client a going concern? We need to be able to answer it. The audit of evidence as regards going concern, the assessment and disclosure in the financial statements. We need to be able to report on the financial statement that we just audited, the quality control for our audit work. Quality control exists actually for audit work, and there are frameworks as regards that. Who is responsible for QA, quality assurance in an audit firm? What are the levels of quality assurance in the audit firm? The level of the firm generally and the level of engagement and assignments. Those are the types of levels that we have. Then what and what are do they entail? These are the things we are going to be learning. The quality control are the individual audit engagement level, and we are going to summarize this topic, and after that we move on to chapter 8 about the internal control system. About the internal control system, especially the internal control systems of our clients. We need to understand in the course of learning the principle of auditing and assurance, we need to understand the definition. Don't forget, when we earlier started, I let us know that passing audit actually requires understanding of terminologies, just like in every industry. The definition, the objective, the feature, and the importance of internal control systems. We need to understand it, the objective of internal control system, the essence and the feature of internal control system, the internal control system environment, the importance of it to auditor, and to our expression of opinion. Types of internal controls that we have: the physical, the digital, and so many more that we are going to be examining. The scope and the content, the component of internal control system, we need to understand it. The inherent limitation in every internal control system set by the management, we need to understand it. We need to understand how to ascertain system of control. We need to be able to know how to record system of control. We need to be able to evaluate the internal control system, whether it's weak, whether it's strong, whether it's in existence, whether it's not in existence at all. We need to understand the practicality of the application of internal control system and how it affects our audit. We need to understand the control system as they are applied to small entity and as they could be applied to the public entity. We need to understand how to report internal control systems to management and what is the medium we use to in reporting internal control system to the management. What process, when do we need to report the internal control systems? All these and many more we need to learn and understand. Then internal audit as a control factor too, we need to understand this. Then we move on to the public sector assurance, and we are talking about public sector assurance. We need to understand some degree of key things like the appointment, the power, the function of the auditor general. So now we are more or less leaving the public sector, the private sector for the public sector auditing. So we need to understand how Auditor General is appointed, who is an Auditor General, how should we relate to Auditor General as component auditor. Now we need to understand appointment of Auditor General. The acting capacity of Auditor General, is power or her power, the function of Auditor General's office, the book that we need to assess, the book that Auditor General should have and assess, the audit of public accounts, auditing for compliance as regards rules and regulation for the public directorate, the function of the office of Auditor General. We need to understand the composition and the framework, the structure of the office of Auditor General, how to raise audit query and how to raise alarm in public sector auditing, the role of the public accounts committee, just like we have audit committee in private organization. This is the replacement of the board of directors set up audit committee. The role of public account committee, the PAC, the power of to conduct investigation, the power as to matter or as to evidence that the auditor has given, and the observation, the basis of the activity of the public accounts committee. We need to understand the internal audit in the public sector, the problems that the public accounts committee members could have and how they need to go about it. We need to understand the objective, the scope of internal audit in public sector, just like we need to understand the operation of the internal audit in public sector, the responsibility of the internal auditor, the responsibility of the PAC committee. We need to understand the due processes to follow, especially when it comes to the due process about the public procurement and the application and applicability of the Public Procurement Acts, the establishment of the procurement bureau actually for the public sector. We need to understand and what do they actually do. It's really great to go back to basis of the principle of auditing, and chapter 10 actually deals with the IT-based assurance. And under IT-based assurance, we'll be covering computer in audit administration, the use and the influence of audit of computer in audit environment. The auditor's approach when we are involving computerization, the planning, the control, and the recording using computer, internal control evaluation using computer, the review of financial statement using computer. Don't forget that even though majority of the things that we are going to be doing will be the same when we are auditing physically and when we are auditing based on computer, but the difference is while we can touch our books and record, we could not touch the computer programs and application. So we need to have understanding of how to go about using this method, that is computerization, for us to be able to do all these things and many more that I'm going to mention. So we must be able to use the internal workings of the programming language to evaluate the internal control system of our clients. We need to be able to review using computer. We are going to be learning audit approach in IT-based environments when our client's office is actually based on digital working. We need to understand how to go about it. Then we'll talk about CAT, which means in audit language, computer assisted audit techniques, and the breakdown of audit of CAT, audit interrogation software that we can use, the audit test data, the embedded audit facility. What does this mean? Those programs that queries the internal working of our clients facility or computer system and bring back evidence for us to be able to use. We call it to be able to manipulate so that we can have audit evidence and generate audit evidence. The simulation, we simulate. What is simulation? We are going to be learning it and how to simulate. Program for logic and coding, we are going to learn. Majority of this will be on the basic as per our syllabus, not the in-depth knowledge, because we are talking about coding. Then we need to go for to a different school for coding. So it's this one is not about learning the coding language or being a coder, but at least we must understand program logics and the coding. We need to understand and have knowledge based system. We need to understand the control in a computer environment. Don't forget the digital control is different from analog control or physical control. So what are the controls that we must set and put in place in computer environment for as an audit firm or even in relation to our audit clients? Examples of application control application, examples of general controls that we have in an IT audit environment. We need to understand the control when we are talking about online business, a real-time system, and the like. The real-time system control, we need to understand it. The database management system, we need to understand it. The control problems in a small computer system environment, we need to understand it, and how can we mitigate it? What should be our recommendation? How can we go about recommending? Lack of planning over the acquisition and use of personal computers or the computer system. So we need to understand how to plan for acquisition of computer, knowing our needs, knowing the needs of our organization, of our clients organization, and what capacity of computer do we need, and the lack and the lack of documentary evidence, how it can hinder IT-based assurance, the lack of security and confidentiality, and how it affects our audit opinion. These and many more, we are going to go into detail and understand this. Wow, really, it's been a while, and it's worthwhile that you stay around. And as we are concluding, we need to understand reporting or reports on the financial statements. This is chapter 11. And what is the expectation? There are basic elements in reporting or in auditor's reports. What and what are they? These are the things we need to learn here. Then, what is clean audit or clean audit reports? That is a report without any auditor's qualification. What are modified audit reports? These are reports that we actually qualify. And what are the level of qualification of audit reports? Matters that do not actually affect auditor's opinion, like emphasis of matter. We are going to be dealing with it. And emphasis of matter, where should it be in an auditor's report? Matters that do affect auditors reports. How are we going to know and distinguish between the matters that do not affect our opinion from the matters that do affect our opinion? These are the knowledge that we need to have now concerning chapter 11. Then disclosure in a modified opinion, that is in a qualified audit opinion. What and what should we disclose? The circumstances that may result in us modifying our report on a financial statement that we've audited. The limitation of scope, management limitation of scope, or general limitation of scope. What and how should we go about them? The disagreement between us and management, how should we manage them? These are under reports on audited financial statements. Then how should we complete audits? This is dealt with under chapter 12. Completion of audits. We will be looking at the procedure to audit completion, the final review of the draft financial statements, the peer review and the like, and other types of review that we have. Which one best suits which audit engagement? Drafting of our audit report. What and what should be in an audit report? Elements of a good audit report. The issues of documentation. Documentation, that is management control reports. What and what should it be inside it? When should it go out? How should it go out? Who should we communicate it to? Who should have access to the documentation concerning the issues that we've observed? Then the audit completion checklist that we should have. What and what should be on the checklist? The engagement partners sign off. When will the engagement partner of an audit firm actually sign off? What are the processes of audit signing off? We need to know the briefing. We need to understand the reporting to the board and to the management. What should go to the board? What should go to the management? When and how to deal with it? Consideration for desirability of reappointments. If we want to be reappointed and if we don't want to be reappointed, how should we go about it? All these are on frameworks that we need to learn. Truth and fairness in assessment of the financial statement. What does this mean? What is fairness? What is truthfulness in the financial statements? What level of assurance can we have? What level of assurance could we not achieve? And why? Where is a true and fair view may not be given? What circumstances could arise that we may not be able to achieve the truth and fairness, and may arise to disqualification of our opinion regarding the truthfulness and the fair presentation of assets, of liability, or the financial statement as a whole. We must understand how to complete our audit work as regards all the captions or various captions of the financial statements, the profit or loss accounts, the statements of comprehensive income or other comprehensive income, the representation of liability of assets, what and what, and how to complete our audit work. Also, other assurance engagement and how audit engagement can lead to other assurance engagements, and where to separate them and how to go about them. These are many more are the things that actually we must understand under the principle of auditing. So basically now we had overview the topics under various the 12 chapters that we just display right about now. We've overviewed them, and in preparation for the full-blown topics and lectures on them one after the other, and we are going to start by understanding the nature, the purpose, and the scope of auditing, and which is our chapter 1. It is expected of us to learn and understand after this what we mean by historical background of auditing. Audits is as old as humanity, and from what background is auditing coming from? We are going to be learning it. Auditing today, especially in the contemporary world of information technology, of blockchain and the like. Definition of audit. Don't forget, audit is particular about terminologies. Why the need for audit? Why must we audit? Knowing fully well that accountants have had worked on the financial statement, why do we still need to audit? The objective, the general principle governing an audit of the financial statements. We need to understand and go into detail about it, the advantages, the disadvantages of audit, the limitation of audit, the expectation gap, and how to bridge the gap. We are going to be learning under the nature and purpose and the scope of auditing. The structure of an audit firm. This is very interesting, and we will be learning it just like every other industry or every other organization. An audit firm has structure, types of audits that we may have. We will go into it. We understand at the end of the day the meaning of assurance, why assurance is different from audit, and why audit engagement is different from assurance engagement. The chronology of an audit, we need to understand it and how to arrange our file and the like. We need to understand auditing and other assurance services that as accountants we may undertake. The agency theory and auditing. The agency theory and auditing, like management, they are agents to the organization. The board of directors, they are agents to the organization. The auditors, what relationship do we have in form of the agency theory? How should agency theory affect our audits, and how should we relate with the agents of our clients organization? These are the things we are going to be learning. We are going to cap it all by understanding the role and what audit committee really is, and the role of audit committee, what to do with audit committee, what not to do with the audit committee, and many more. Recapping everything that we have learned today. Basically, this video is for the introduction and overview of our syllabus, and when we are talking about the principles of auditing, it is a basic knowledge that every accountant, any one that want to become captain of industry and an entrepreneur should have and understand. We had gone through the 12 chapters. We had gone through the 5 breakdown of the syllabus, and we've looked at the breakdown of the principle of auditing, the aim and objective of auditing, the topics of the auditing. We've looked at the the 12 chapters, and we had introduced ourselves to the nature, the purpose, and the scope of auditing. And we said under the topics, we have the breakdown of the topics into five folds. Introduction to auditing is 12 is 25%, rather, pardon me, it's been a while. Assurance process is 20%, internal control is 20%, assurance in specialized environments 20%, audit completion 20%, assurance in specialized environment 15%. And these five jugulars are all have different subtopics and different weight that they have, the percentile. Then we'll be talking about the introduction to auditing, having audit principle and theory, 5% that made up that 25%. Also, the rights, the duty, the responsibility of auditors we need to learn, and it's weighted 5% to the regulatory framework is 5% of the 25%. The professional ethics is 5% of the 25%. And last but not the least, under introduction to auditing, the auditor's liability is 5% of the 25%. Assurance process has its own 20%, broken down into audit planning, audit evidence, audit testing, and verification procedure as 5%. I want to believe that by now you had subscribed to Teachings Associate channel. If you've not, please subscribe, click notification, click halls, and when you do, don't forget to like, don't forget to share so that other colleagues around you could be reached out to by us. Thank you for doing that right away. Under assurance processes, which is 25% of the syllabus, audit planning, audit evidence, audit testing, and verification procedure is 5% of the 20%. Then we have audit evidence and audit verification, 10% of the 20%. Audit testing and sampling technique carries 5% of the 20%. The internal control processes is actually 20%, and it has a lot under it to be covered, like internal control activity, how to put on internal control system, the response, who is responsible for internal control system, what is internal control environment, and so many, a lot of others. 20%, you could imagine it, for it to have 20% as a topic, what it entails. Then assurance in specialized environments is 15%, and the contributors under this one are public sector assurance, 10% of the 15%. Then information technology, that is IT based assurance, 5% of the 15%. Last but not the least is how to complete our audit, which is 20%. And under it, we have basically two things to consider: reporting on the financial statement, 10%, and audit completion, 10% of it all. We've said it before. Please click and share. The objective had been looked at, the aim had been looked at, the topic has had been looked at. We've introduced ourselves to the next topic, which you can join us, and we had love you join us as we go and learn together the nature, the purpose, the scope of auditing. From G. James Associate, Bengal Latinji FCA is my name. We had loved that you subscribe one more time. Tell others to tell others, your friends, your colleague at work, to subscribe to G. James Associate channel. You can share this on other platforms. G. James Associate channel. The next topic we'll be having will be on the nature of audit, the purpose of audit, and the scope of audit. Join us next time.